Hey, it's Max from UNFTR, back from a brief hiatus and here to talk to you about the largest IPO in history. SpaceX just hit the NASDAQ at a $2 trillion plus valuation, and it's only grown in size since it listed, making it one of the most valuable companies in the world. So I think we need to unpack this word value, which has apparently lost all meaning. We also need to address what this company actually is, because it is not what it's being sold as. And most importantly, we need to acknowledge that we just handed an immigrant from South Africa an unlimited war chest to continue destroying the very government that made him the wealthiest person on the planet, by a mile. All right, so let's talk about value. What does that word even mean? Before we get into the mechanics of this preposterous IPO, one that broke every rule of public offerings just to enrich Elon Musk and his cadre of early investors, many of whom are also hell-bent on the destruction of U.S. democracy and the rule of law, let's talk about value. SpaceX opened at $135 a share on June 12th, but its current valuation already puts it way above $2 trillion, which makes it more valuable than Amazon. So SpaceX had $18 billion in revenue last year, but it lost $5. Amazon posted net operating income of around $80 billion on more than $700 billion in revenue. And SpaceX is more valuable than Amazon. Makes total sense, right? So let's move on. Wall Street has a long tradition of twisting itself in knots to justify these fantastical valuations. And in SpaceX's case, the logic is fundamentally flawed and built on lies. But the value proposition, right, in spite of those lies, comes down to two things: upside potential and fear. The fear of betting against somebody who's done it before. But has he? See, when Tesla went public, it quickly gained a valuation that topped every major American automaker combined, despite being a fraction of their size and also losing money. It became an investment juggernaut. So for a lot of people on Wall Street, this is a case of once bitten, twice shy. They missed the Tesla rocket ship, or maybe they didn't, and they're not missing this one. But the bigger upside isn't rockets, it's AI. Elon has promised to transform SpaceX into the leading AI company in the world. But here's the thing. SpaceX is currently dead last in this AI race, because Grok, its flagship AI product, ranks fourth behind ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. And Grok's primary claim to fame, per a Common Sense Media study, is generating nearly 6,700 sexually deviant image requests per hour by design. And yet somehow, people think Elon is at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence. Here's the thing. He wasn't even in the game until relatively late. According to Ronan Farrow's piece in The New Yorker, Musk had to be convinced by the others who were already well along the path that AI was the only path to computing power that would be necessary to someday leave the planet. That's what brought him in, not a genius insight or something, some divine inspiration, just a conversation with people that are like, hey, Elon, if you want to go to Mars someday, it's going to take AI. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. But nobody's talking about any of this when they're buying SpaceX at a $2 trillion valuation. So let's look at what SpaceX says it's worth and where it says they're going, because the math here is fascinating. And by fascinating, I mean impossible. In its prospectus, SpaceX claims a total addressable market, its TAM, of $28 trillion. And they literally described it as the largest actionable total addressable market in human history. So for reference, that's the GDP of the United States. Like literally. So SpaceX is telling you that it intends to capture a market that's roughly the size of the entire US economy. Okay. Here's how they break it down. The SpaceX segment of the TAM is $370 billion. Connectivity, which is Starlink, is $1.6 trillion. But then AI, which is the really big enchilada, is $26 trillion. That's 93% of their total projected market. And we just established they're really bad at it. And they're last. So we did a deep dive into all these numbers over at UNFTR. I'll link it in the description if you want to learn more. But when you look at the actual revenue picture, it gets even more illuminating. SpaceX's space segment, the rockets, generated $4 billion in revenue last year and lost $657 million doing it. More importantly for me, though, this segment, which is kind of the biggest, boldest piece of it, grew at 7% from the prior year. That's terrible. Connectivity, which is the only business that actually makes money, is $11 billion in revenue with $4 billion to the bottom line. But where did all the money go in these big losses? SpaceX spent $9.5 billion building Grok and only brought in $3.2 billion in revenue. So the average revenue for a company that's in the NASDAQ 100, where they are now, is somewhere between 30 and 35 billion. SpaceX isn't even half of a normal company that's on this exchange already. Its core business is growing really slowly. It's hemorrhaging in others, and its only profitable division is a satellite internet company. Now it's more valuable than Amazon. The only independent valuation that made any sense, and it was still a stretch, was from Morningstar, which put the value at $780 billion, which is 56% below the IPO price, and now a fraction of what it's worth because of all the market activity. So 1/5 of SpaceX's total revenue comes directly from the federal government. That's an important piece that we'll come back to. But before we get to what this company really is, I want to establish something that should be front and center in every single conversation about Elon Musk, the man. Elon Musk is a product of government subsidies. So according to the Washington Post investigation, Musk and his companies have received at least $38 billion in government contracts, in loans, subsidies, and tax credits over 2 decades. 2/3 of that came in the last 5 years. So in 2024 alone, federal and local government contracts committed at least $6 billion to Musk's enterprises. That's a record high. Now, SpaceX has received $22 billion in government contracts. NASA alone has paid SpaceX nearly $15 billion for crew transport, supply missions, and the lunar lander program. The Pentagon kicked in another $7 billion. And Tesla's story is just as telling. Tesla received a critical $465 million Department of Energy loan in 2010. That money kept it alive just long enough to build the Model S. It's generated roughly $11 billion, that's 1/3 of its total profits, from selling regulatory credits established by government clean energy policy. Democrats' clean energy policy, by the way. And Tesla buyers received an estimated $3.4 billion in federal tax credits before that program eventually wound down. Solar City, same story, built entirely on federal renewable energy credits. And then there's Doge. Elon didn't just benefit from the government, he created new grant opportunities for himself while he was dismantling the agencies that he was supposed to be auditing. The prospectus literally lists the US government as one of the largest drivers of SpaceX revenue. So when he says that he wants to cut government spending, what he means is he wants to cut your government spending to make room for him to get more. So here's what I really want to convey. SpaceX, not a space company. SpaceX is a SPAC company, so much so that the E in space might just be a typo. So if you hadn't heard of it, a SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company, basically just a shell company designed to raise a massive war chest from Wall Street so that it can go out and play Pac-Man and buy other companies. It's just a consolidation vehicle. And everything about how SpaceX was structured and taken public points directly to this. Many financial market observers, including the institutional investors who bought into the offering, have been pretty open about the real reason that they're in. They expect SpaceX to absorb Tesla. So Elon controls both companies, right? Combining them under one umbrella and one balance sheet means just putting it in one pocket. Now, that's not a theory. It's the obvious next move. So if you like Tesla, you have to like SpaceX, because they're going to be the same company. Now, Look at the mission statement. SpaceX says it intends to build the systems and technologies necessary to make life multiplanetary, to understand the true nature of the universe, and to extend the light of consciousness to the stars. That's not paraphrasing. That is literally the company's mission statement. And 93% of its projected revenue is supposed to come from AI and orbital data centers that don't exist and probably will never, because science. So their own prospectus says, and I'm going to read this directly here, quote, several of our anticipated market opportunities, including certain AI, orbital, lunar, and interplanetary transportation and industrial activities, are still emerging and evolving, or do not currently exist, and such markets may not develop as we expect, or at all. I mean, such markets don't exist, and they might never. But here's where it gets criminal, at least in spirit, if not law. This IPO would never have gotten off the ground under normal regulatory conditions, because the SEC, under the leadership of the administration that Elon helped install, just looked the other way while two sets of rules were quietly rewritten. The first one, the NASDAQ changed its bylaws. So, conveniently timed for the SpaceX June listing, in May, NASDAQ enacted what it calls a fast entry rule. So, under the old rules, a company had to season for at least 3 months before joining the NASDAQ 100. Most cases, it was up to a year, and it needed a minimum 10% public float, meaning 10% of the shares had to be available to the public. Under the new rules, top 40 companies by market cap can just enter the index in 15 trading days, and that float minimum totally eliminated. So SpaceX floated about 5% of its total shares, which was an artificially very thin slice designed to create scarcity to drive up the price. Now, under the old rules, it could never have entered any major index. So NASDAQ literally rewrote the rules so SpaceX could get in, and this is hugely important. See, Musk made early NASDAQ 100 inclusion a condition of his listing there, so they had to do it, and they complied. They didn't have to do it, they just complied. Okay, so you might be thinking, this is just Wall Street nonsense. Why is this important to me? I'll tell you. It means that every ETF, every index mutual fund, every passively managed retirement portfolio that tracks the NASDAQ 100 is now required to hold SpaceX without choice. So if you have a 401k that includes an index fund with any exposure to the NASDAQ, congrats. You are an investor in SpaceX, whether you know it or not or want to be. Passive flows into the deal were estimated to be nearly $50 billion. Now, the second issue is the lockup period. Standard IPO lockups keep insiders from selling for at least 180 days, the idea being that executives and early investors have to live by the company's performance instead of cashing out as soon as they go public. SpaceX used a staggered lockup schedule. So most early investors, like sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, members of the so-called PayPal mafia, can begin selling 20% of their stakes at the first quarterly earnings call, which is right around the corner. Now, Elon's lockup is longer, but early investor exit liquidity was essentially baked in from day one. They changed the rules, and the SEC allowed it, because this is Trump's SEC. Now let's talk about what we've actually done here, because beyond the IPO mechanics, beyond the accounting tricks and the rule changes and this bizarre mission statement about extending the light of consciousness to the stars, we've handed one guy an unlimited war chest. And look what he did the last time he had a pretty sizable one. He contributed $200 million more to the 2024 election. And analysts have subsequently determined that it was about roughly 115,000 votes in key swing states that determined that outcome. So did his money make a difference? You tell me. But here's the scale. 200 million today represents 0.02% of his net worth. What are we doing? With the capital raised in this IPO, Musk can acquire dozens, scores, maybe hundreds of other companies. He can buy his way into AI dominance even if he never builds a data center in orbit. He can own and reshape entire industries. We've already seen what his vision of AI looks like, though. It's grok, it's unsavory, and it's unstable. But we've given him the means to own the whole board. And so let's be really clear about something. Elon Musk has never, ever run a company that turned a profit on its own merits. Not once. He was kicked out of PayPal before it turned a profit. And the reason he was pushed out, by the way, is because he refused to implement basic protections against money laundering. He did not create Tesla. He invested in it with that PayPal money windfall and then took control of it. And then he spent years spinning lies about its viability. And without those renewable energy tax credits established by Democrats, and without Trump locking out better made and less expensive foreign EV competitors, Tesla does not have the profit picture that it has today. His solar company didn't make money. The one car that this guy designed at Tesla, the Cybertruck, became the worst-selling vehicle ever. His boring company is the laughingstock of American infrastructure. It also loses money, and the projects that it completes only happen because it skirts local regulations. So now he has a space company that also loses money. Put all of it together, and somehow we have the richest man in the world. Make it make sense. Elon Musk exists because the system is broken, but he thrives only on the parts of it that still work. He is a creature of government subsidies. He is, by the way, technically an illegal immigrant. He overstayed a student visa and worked without authorization in 1995. That's when he started here, according to reporting by The Guardian and The Washington Post and others. So in the world that he spent the last several years trying to create, he would have been deported. And as for the potential upside for the American taxpayer who built this monster, he moved his company to Texas specifically to avoid state income taxes. So you're shit out of luck on that front too. So we're now in a position where we can no longer afford for the worst businessman in the country to fail. And all of this, by the way, was made possible by the leadership of the other worst businessman in the country. The whole thing, it's a scam. And it's barely 3-card Monty because every card is a joker. With the MeidasTouch Network, I'm Max from UNFTR. If you want the full deep dive on all the numbers and the TAM breakdown, the segment-by-segment financials, the prospectus disclaimers, check out our piece at unftr.com. I'll link it in the description. And don't forget, you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter at unftr.com as well. That's all for now, and I'll catch you online.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.